Hello everybody, this is ManuS again, coming at you with another Legends of Runeterra deck tech. This deck that I want to talk to you about is basically the first deck that I built and the last deck that I worked on at the same time. After all the other things, I vastly reworked this deck with a better understanding of how games actually play out, what other decks are doing and stuff like that. And while the deck was okay in the beginning, the way it is now, I think it is really strong. I played a bunch of games with the latest version and made a couple of changes over like the last 10-ish games that I played to get to the list that I'm currently at, and I really like it. The deck feels really brutal. I basically learned that deck building and the way decks look and play out is a bit more like Magic, I would say, than it is like in Hearthstone, even though we are forced into this like Hearthstone-esque structure with the mana and stuff. But yeah, I felt like you can build decks more in a way that you would sort of build them and make them play out in Magic to an extent. Like for example, going really low curve and stuff like that. Anyway, the deck, I called it Zoo. It's basically like an Ionia Noxus aggressive deck that, now that I look at it, has become much heavier Ionia than Noxus. It was much more even before. But yeah, it's pretty cool. You'll see in a moment. I'll show you and explain the deck list and the way the deck works. The Zoo reference might help Hearthstone and yeah, Magic players to get an idea where we are going with this. Anyway, before we do, subscribe down below for more and hit the like button if you enjoy the content. And now on to the deck. Alright, so this is the deck. Take a look at the curve. The deck is mostly 1s and 2s and a couple of 3s basically. Also, it's only 3 champs again. And unlike in the last deck tech where there probably should be 6 champs, this is more like the first deck tech, or even stronger than in that case, that I'm almost certain that 3 champions is the right number for this region combination, simply because I don't want more high cost units. There are no cheaper champions available that seem worthwhile. Sure, we could play Teemo, but I mean, Teemo without build around seems pretty pointless. He's still like a 1-1 elusive that becomes a 2-2 elusive at some point, so maybe that makes it worthwhile to just run it on its own over one of the other 1-drops, but I'm pretty skeptical about that, which is why I haven't done it for now. But that's like the only one that I could remotely see, and it's probably worse than the other 1-drops overall. So yeah, that's why we only run 3 Zed, because Zed is super powerful, one of the premium champs in the game, and I'm not too eager to play stuff like Draven, because it's more 3-drops, and Draven is also not that impressive, and it really doesn't do what the deck wants to do. If you really want to, maybe you could run like 1 Draven, and some Draven's biggest fan or whatever, but I'd rather just like keep the curve the way it is. So yeah, we have 3 Inspiring Mentors, 3 Legion Rearguards, 3 Legion Saboteur, 3 Sparring Student, 2 Precious Pet, and 2 Blade Scout. Deck wants a lot of 1-drops. First of all, you always need a 1-drop on turn 1. And second of all, you have a lot of 1s and 2s, so you want to play like multiple units a turn all the time. So in order to be able to do that, you want your curve to be low. And that is particularly relevant for Sparring Student and Greenglade Duo triggers. So the more units you play each turn, the harder they hit. Sparring Student is much better than it would be in other games usually. First of all, he can also block as a big unit, because if you're on defense and play units, it still grows. Something you couldn't do in, say, Magic with this card. Second of all, it kind of cheats the whole damage is permanent condition, because it basically works like it would work in Magic. because in combat, if it's a 4/4 and takes 3 damage, it's still gonna end up being a 1/1 at the end, making this effectively stronger than your typical, say, 3/3 or 4/4. Like a 1 cost 3/3 in a deck like this would not be much better than Sparring Student, because Student can sort of retain its size as long as it's big enough to not die, or the opponent doesn't want to trade their like big enough units. So yeah, I've been pretty impressed with how good this card is. And yeah, this is just like solid 1-drop, nothing fancy, but if the opponent doesn't have a blocker and we are first, we get to deal 3 on the first turn, which is a lot on a 20 starting health opponent. Then Rearguard is just heavy hitter 1-drop. Inspiring Mentor is in the deck to do various things. The main purpose of it is to buff Navori Highwayman. Even with a single buff, this card is suddenly super powerful because you effectively get like 2 1-cost 2/3, and that for 1 card, so it's card advantage, it's tempo advantage, it's great stats, it's amazing. Then we have Silent Shadowseer, which also benefits from the buff, and of course Zed. And then we also have Navori Conspirator to return Mentor and reuse it, which is the primary thing that Conspirator returns. Then we have Blade Scout. It's not that great, like especially when you're on defense, it's a terrible turn 1 play, because then you waste the trigger. It's also not that impressive because it did 3 damage and afterwards it's a 1/1, but it's a decent 1-drop to reuse with Conspirator, because there's not a lot of elusive, so it's semi-unblockable a lot of the time, making sure you get damage through. It is possible that maybe there should only be 1 and like a 3rd Precious Pet, for example. I'm not super high on these, but having 1 or 2 seems probably fine for the like Conspirator thing that I mentioned, or just when you draw multiple sets and get his signature spell, and then you can return it. Otherwise, it's basically sort of a worse Silent Shadowseer, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Then we have 2 Rush, simply because the deck is all about board presence and tempo, and this is cheap. It lets you use spare power that you couldn't use on a turn, and that goes to your spell mana, and it also lets you win exchanges in combat in a very cheap fashion, which is pretty nice. So 1 to 2 are probably the right number. 3 would probably flood you too much on them, and they are kind of situational and can be low impact, especially against like unit light opponents. Then we have Brothers Bond. It's a bit clunkier than Rush and doesn't let you win trades, but it lets you enable trades with some of your like low impact units like Mentor, Highwayman. It also deals a lot of damage on unblocked units. It's possible that there should be 3, I had 3 for a lot of the time, but it's a bit clunky and a bit situational, so I went down to 2 for now. But the card is fairly powerful for what it does, so it is possible that there should be a 3rd, but drawing multiples is pretty bad probably, so that's why I leave it at 2 for now. Greenglade Duo, just amazing. It's elusive, it hits like a truck. The way the deck is built, it's just super powerful. House Spider is basically the Force Navori Highwayman, just having as many like 2-for-1 units as possible to trigger the duo and the student, and also just like keep the board wide to get damage in and stuff like that is nice. And we have 3 Keeper of Masks. Just a solid body. 2/3 is fairly robust. It survives some of the sweeper stuff that deal 1s and deal 2s, like Avalanche and stuff like that, while also actually dealing a lot of damage the way the deck is built. By the time you play this, you often have 3 or 4 units that get buffed by this, So this is often adding like 5-6 damage to the board the turn you play it, if you're attacking. It is possible, like the third is a bit debatable depending on how you like want to adjust the deck. So I've went back and forth between 2 and 3, but it's probably too powerful to not run 3. But if you need room because you figure out that you need something else more, I could see going down to 2, because like on turn 2 and it's not very good, sometimes on turn 3 it's not good because you're on defense, and then it's only like a turn 4 play. So even though it costs 2, it's not an early play, which is why I could see going down to 2 to make room for other things. Then, yeah, Conspirator, pretty great. Deck has a lot of cheap things to return, some of them very beneficial, and Elusive is pretty strong in a deck like this. So a 2 cost 3/2 Elusive is pretty great. And it lets you reuse Highwayman, House Spider, or just some of the 1-drop abilities, or even like Keeper of Masks. Then I have then I have the Highwayman, just 2-for-1 thing, great with the Mentor, pretty nice with Bond and Keeper, and of course with Duo and Student to trigger them, and just like make a wide board. The deck usually has 5 or 6 units attacking from like turn 3 onwards, which is pretty sweet. And then we have Silent Shadowseer. I think the deck probably wants 1 or 2 of these, sort of as a backup plan in the mid to late game to try and make sure you can close out the game. Given how good Elusive is and that there isn't a lot of Elusives blocking you, especially against like non-aggressive decks, it's usually like the 3-cost 2/2 Elusive that draws a card, and that's about it. The other Elusives are aggro cards, and there it doesn't matter too much. So against like non-aggro decks, you basically can just use this to hit the opponent for 3 a turn. And you can also obviously buff it with Brother's Bond or Mentor to make it even scarier, and it allows you to like pressure opponents without overextending too much into certain things, and yeah, just win through stabilized boards when they have too many blockers and stuff, just adding some nice elusive threats. Like I said, not 100% sure on the second, but I think having at least 1 copy is probably pretty good. And then I realized that the deck actually mostly has issues with some of the big spells like Avalanche, Wailing Souls, I think it is, like 5 mana deal a drain 1 from all enemies, and some blowout tricks and the 9 mana sweeper and stuff like that. And yeah, Deny stops all of that. It also stops some of this, some skills that can be relevant. So not sure on the second copy, but having the first copy is pretty sure correct, and the second is probably decent, given the way the deck plays out. In the mid game you usually have the power left, the mana left to use this. And yeah, then we have this reset, just as sort of a power play. Also great synergy with Mentor, and great synergy with the Duo and the Student. And yeah, you also have minor buffing from like Brother's Bond or Rush if you want to use it pre-combat to just deal some extra damage. Yeah, the deck is hyper aggressive, super low curve, and just kind of runs people over in pretty impressive fashion, but you'll see in the games. This is currently by far my favorite deck, and feels the strongest of anything I played so far, and kind of like is a culmination of everything that I've learned over the last like 3 days of playing Legends of Runeterra and winning and losing against a bunch of stuff, and people evolving, and how good the decks are they are playing and how decently they play them and stuff like that. But yeah, enough talk about the deck. Time to see it in action, so see you in a moment with the first game. Stay tuned.